Okay, we are recording, folks. I hope everyone's doing great. Trying to get ourselves through this August, the hottest part of the LA summer. September gets a little better, not a lot, but a little. Okay, I wouldn't expect cool weather until, I hate to say it, the end of October. But anyway, so this lesson is scheduled for the 22nd of August. So we'll have another one after that, and then we'll be out of August and into September. Okay. All right. I hope you enjoy this. This is going to be entitled Working for a Living. And we're going to talk a lot about economic systems, what have you. Okay. So without further ado, let me go where I need to go. Okay. And let me minimize myself. If it wants to, does it want to minimize? Look at that. Looks like it's, there we go. Get out of there. No, does not. Okay. There, finally. Being stubborn. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so we hit the start the slideshow. And then from the beginning, get us up to speed here. Okay. Abbreviation ANT 101, Introduction to Anthropology. And thing here on the bottom states what week it is. And like I said, we're going to get into working for a living, and I've chosen the most easily to remember important facts here. Instead, I took away what writers call fluff. Okay, if you don't know what fluff is, I don't mean fluff a pillow, but it's like if you bought a book and it was going to explain Einstein's formulas, and you were a physics major, let's say, and you want them to really get into it, all the formulas and all the mathematics, and the book starts writing, oh, did you know that Einstein liked apricot Danish, and he used to walk down some street in New York, and he used to get a Danish there, but if they were sold out, then he walked across the street, and then he looked for his friend Yo-Yo to have coffee. All that stuff is fluff. It has nothing to do with what you should learn, what you should remember, for your life's enrichment. So I've tried to take that out of here. Okay? All right. No fluff. Here we go. So like I said, we're going to be talking about economy, since the title of this week is Working for a Living. When most people think of economics or the economy, what comes to mind is money, markets, right? Stock markets, corporations, companies, stocks, banks, and the like, ETC. Often, especially after the global economic crisis beginning in 2008. Do any of you guys remember that? Were you kids? I was there. Oh, it was rough, baby, 2008. Rough. Wow, a lot of people lost their homes. The economy just went crazy. We had a lot of police activity in K-Town, believe it or not, so we don't have to worry about that so much. They were out giving tickets because, as they said at the time, and I heard them, the city needs your revenue. Okay. All right. So again, repeating the economic crisis beginning in 2008. The economy seems like an entity or a living thing, right, with a life of its own, a natural force. And the classical economist Adam Smith in 1776, 300 years ago, encouraged us to imagine a great invisible hand guiding the economy, which was none other than the cumulative, which is like the added effect of individual economic decisions. So that means all the economic decisions that we make accumulates and gives us the one overall, either on the good side or the bad side, effect in the economy. Okay, all societies, again, Chinese society, Mexican society, American society, have had an economic component factor. In fact, the economy is one of the four basic social domains, social class, of social anthropology. As people engage in activity that transform the physical environment into usable goods and services for human beings. However, not all societies have had money and markets, etc. The familiar elements of modern, or what we call modern economy. According to Chris Hahn and Keith Hart, an anthropological approach to economics arising in the 1800s, concentrating on the economies of primitive man, sought precisely to test the claim that a world economic order must be founded on principles that underpinned a Western industrial society striving for universality. Get that? Oh, excuse me. Trying not to sneeze here. Oh, what's wrong with me? So, even way back in the 1800s, 200 something years ago, 20, they want to test this claim of world economic order towards what's run now as the Western industrial society. Okay. Cultural anthropology has since demonstrated that many of the taken for granted assumptions are about economics are not universal. They don't apply to every country in the world. Okay, that's their theory here. Again, as I tell you every week, some of these theories I agree with, some of them I don't, and you can be the same. Okay. Again, that's why they call them taken for granted assumptions. Okay. But see, at the same time, outgrowing its original interest in so-called primitive economies. Anthropology has applied its concepts and methods to modern, translocal, and global economic connections and processes. Okay, now we're going to go into key concepts in economic anthropology. This is not an economics class like micro or macro, so we have to realize we're still studying anthropology. Economists conventionally divide the activities of the economy, any economy, you could say our economy, into three phases: production, distribution, and consumption. Like they say, as we buy our Nikes and our McDonald's, our Starbucks, we are all consumers, right? We're consuming these products in the economy. They, along with anthropologists, have generally paid the most attention to production, manufacturing, less to distribution, and surprisingly little to consumption. I thought, really? We haven't studied consumption that much? As we noted, it's Karl Marx, famous socialist, communist, viewed production and productive embodied material activity as the driver of economics, society, and history. Each society was, in his view, shaped by its mode of production, which way it produced things, which was then subdivided into the means of production, how production was done, and then the relations of production. Means of production refer to the kinds of labor done, as well as the tools and technology available. The natural resources, the human knowledge and skills, and any capital for investing into the future. Relations of productions refer to the social organization of production, including the list, intent, or final exam. Property or differential access to control over resources, tools, and human knowledge. That differential means that there's some segment of society that has access and control over resources, and there's another part of society that maybe does not, or has a very limited access to and control over resources. We have division of labor, how labor is divided up. Class or economic and social inequalities. Again, you might be a rich person, you might be a poor person, so you're going to be in different areas of this scale. Power, who has power, who doesn't. Specific relationships such as boss, employee, landlord, and renter. Boss might have a lot of power over you, which is okay as long as it's a nice person. Not, then you're in trouble, right? The same with a kind landlord, with a renter that may be struggling for whatever reason. And we have lord and serf. That's in the old European times, medieval times, Russia. Patron client. Don't they always say the client is always correct? Master or slave, slavery time. Or more recently in Marx's analysis, bourgeois owner versus proletariat worker. You're not going to have to know those. Bourgeois is a French term that refers to like high society owner. Proletariat comes from the Soviet era time of, the common worker that just produces and produces. Usually works in bad conditions and doesn't have a say in anything. Finally, a mode of production, according to Marx, gives rise to an ideology or set of values, ideas, beliefs, worldviews, and personality traits in institutions like arts, philosophy, media, education, religion, all reflecting the order of society and functioning to perpetuate that order. So again, we've gone through a couple of these, so just don't get lost in the shuffle. Don't get sleepy on me. Just look at this and go, okay, a mode of production. Okay, I read farther, and then, so they give me the answer here. That gives rise to ideology. What kind of ideology? A set of values, ideas, beliefs, worldviews. So they're stuck in here when they talk about these things. Okay. Cultural anthropologists usually adopt a four-part typology of pre-modern production systems. So now, cultural anthropology is going to talk about production systems. Your answers here. Okay. All right. 1, foraging, or hunting wild animals and gathering plants. That word is used usually for animals or a person that's trying to survive in, let's say, in the forest. They're lost, so there's no supermarket. There's no exchange of money. So you have to search in the forest, and so you're searching for food. That's called foraging. Then you also, unless you say, I'm a strict vegetarian, and you're dying for meat and protein, you're probably going to hunt a wild animal. Right? 2, pastoralism, or raising domesticated animals. If you had to stay there indefinitely, or you wanted to live out in the country, and you're out in the country again, no bonds, no house. But you want your protein, you're going to have to raise domesticated animals, sheep, cows, chickens. Not bears, they're not domesticated. That would just be the I've met people who ate bear. No, thank you. 3, horticulture, or gardening or simple farming without the use of the plow, the big metal thing they used to cut through, or they had a tractor. Irrigation, water system. And therefore, permanent fields, common technique is slash and burn, or Sweden horticulture, shifting fields every few years. Because they switch, because let's say we'll make it simple, you pick the area on the left for a couple of years, and then now the soil is it's dead now after giving you so many plants and vegetables. So you have to shift to the other side. You chose the left first, you go to the right, and the right is ready to be used to bring you your food, specifically your vegetables or fruits. Or intensive agriculture, or high input, high yield farming using plows, irrigation, fertilizer. That's the animal fertilizer or human fertilizer. Every country is different. And sometimes insecticide, which is the medicine you use to kill the bugs that will eat your plants. These inputs allow farmers to use the same fields for many years, which is helpful, or permanently, in fact. Right? You don't want bugs to eat all your stuff and then you have nothing to eat for the winter when you're not farming. One of the main principles of the anthropological perspective on economics is that it is embedded, cemented in there, or integrated with the wider culture and with the physical environment. Let me read that again, might be important. One of the main principles of the anthropological perspective on economics is that it is embedded in or integrated with the wider culture and with the physical environment. We really don't have to see chapter 10, so don't worry about that. Each of these production systems is generally associated with the particular kinds of environments and with particular forms of social organization, ideologies, and personalities. Yes, even personality. For instance, since foragers, we already went over that word, could not control their food supply, they tended to live in small mobile groups. In the absence of private property, tended to prevent wealth accumulation and social inequalities. Consequently, they were typically egalitarian, relatively peaceful, patient, and calm people. Pastoralism establishes property rights over animals, which favors some economic and political inequalities. With men in control of the herds, male power and prestige is enhanced, and traits like aggressiveness and risk-taking are valued. Intensive agriculture creates the most complex society, with formal social classes being made and centralized government. The tremendous surpluses produced by irrigated alluvial fields encourage greater social differentiation, including many non-food producing roles. That's basic stuff we'll kind of know. They're just being very, very thorough here and letting you understand every point, which is good. Okay, so we can move on here if the arrow does its job. Okay. So continuing here, up on top. Much, but by no means all of cultural anthropology's energies have been invested in describing and explaining these pre-modern production systems, some of which continue in modern society in modified, for example, mechanized machine form. However, anthropologists realize that production has continued to evolve, and with it, society. The social sciences themselves were a direct legacy of the profound social changes that attended industrialization, colonialism, and the formation of transnational economic networks, and the urbanization that followed, building of big cities. Industrialism is the name for a system based on mechanical, initially hydraulic and steam power, facilitating or making easy the mass production of manufactured goods. Its central production institution is the factory, which concentrates productive activity and thus human populations in one place, and around this place is where cities grow. And this kind of goes on to this day. Korea, people live from the outer states of Korea and flock to Seoul to get a job. That's where all the big jobs are in Seoul. Same thing, you could say in Japan, going to Tokyo. United States, same thing. People flock to New York, LA, downtown Vegas, for all the jobs that they can get that are not in their other neighborhoods. That's why I'd say thus human population in one place around which cities grow. Okay? Industrialism obviously created new social roles. The factory owner or industrialist and the factory worker or Marxist proletariat. So there's the, again, the Marx term used during the Soviet era, proletariat, factory worker. No rights, no power. New consumption possibilities and new social and psychological habits, for instance, time discipline or following the clock. Yes, they all have to punch in and punch out. And that's how I look at my day as a factory worker or proletariat. In recent decades, some countries like the United States have entered a post-industrial phase in which fewer people work in manufacturing jobs and a declining amount of manufacturing occurs within the country. Personal note, many years ago, it's when, let's say, Target came to Los Angeles, the old Target stores. I had a friend, he was in Oklahoma at the time. I guess in Oklahoma and Texas, they had Targets first. So he wrote me a letter and said, "Oh, I'm working at the store called Target. You know, what a ridiculous name. Is somebody gonna shoot an arrow into the target?" And you know, now everybody sees them here. But when they first came here, the people who first worked there, they all worked at least 40 hours a week and could get overtime. That was the full time. But as you see here, it says in recent times, a declining amount of manufacturing occurs in the country. I've known people in the last few years who work for Target, and they do not work full time. And if it is, someone's going to tell you something like, "Well, this week you're going to work full time, 32 hours, but 40 hours has always been full time." And then the next week you're working 25 hours, you know, or even 19. So shut up. Okay. So we're talking about how the society has changed in manufacturing, which it really just means less work, less ability to get money. So post means after industrial society does further depends on the globalization of production. So now we're talking about, no, we're going to make our money selling our stuff to China, producing in Mexico, right? We don't need so much work here in the United States because we have to pay more, for example. As some countries, China being the current leader, become centers of production, while others become centers of consumption. Definitely in LA, we're a center of consumption. Meanwhile, people living in post-industrial societies perform other, primarily service kinds of jobs. So service jobs are you're working at McDonald's. I guess target to it, not if you're doing stock, but if you're working as a cashier and you have to deal with the public. So that's what service jobs are. Home Depot or what have you, you're dealing with the customers all the time. Again, if you're not working in stock. Okay. And increasingly, employment becomes irregular and unpredictable. Like I told you, one week you work 32 hours, and next week you work 24, and the week after that you work 19. Right? Not good if you're trying to be steady on your rent or save money to try to put a down payment on a house. These are not good things. Where in the past, when I was much younger, that people had guaranteed 40 hours a week, raises, and a lot of opportunity for overtime. That way people could save and try to buy some type of home for themselves. So these things, irregular and unpredictable, forcing changes in how citizens work, live, and think. For the second phase of the economy, distribution, anthropologists tend to follow the typology suggested in Polanyi's, which is the author, The Great Transformation, which distinguished between, try to find out, Polanyi said, okay, did this thing skip? Yes, it did, bad boy. Oops. Something happened there. Now I'm going backwards. This thing is going forward. Let's see, it went all the way. It's not good. Oh, shoot. Bad. So let's hope I can go back. No, it's not letting me go back. So let me fix this my way. Okay. Yeah, sometimes these computers develop these glitches. I don't know why. Okay, so we read through. Okay. Right, we were here. For the second phase of the economy, distribution, anthropologists tend to follow the typology suggested in Polanyi's The Great Transformation, which distinguish between, let me hit this as light as I can, reciprocity, okay, the relatively informal sharing or giving and takes. Well, they say it's a reciprocal relationship. You give and I give to you. And this characterizes relationships between kin, which means family, friends, trading partners, and others in a long-term relationship. Reciprocity may tend toward a balanced state in which individuals give as much as they get. I said you give and I give, it has to be the same. A negative state in which they get more than they give, that's in the negative state, or a generalized state in which they do not calculate what they give or receive. In some societies, especially foraging societies, reciprocity was the main or only distribution practice. But even in modern Western societies, redistribution goes on within families and friendships as a gift and giving. So they're talking about, let's say you have a very successful father and he's retired and later he's sick and he thinks he might not live that much longer, so he makes a will. And he's not going to give the house that he bought many years ago and is valued at $1,000,000 now. He's not going to give it to society. He's going to divide it amongst the kids. Let's say you and your sister, right? So that is the gift of giving to help his family. Well, makes sense. Or redistribution. in which a central person, group, or institution collects wealth and disperses it or gives it out among the participants in the system. The center naturally enjoys a certain degree of prestige, or fame, or power based on its role. In modern urban societies, charities act as redistributors, as does the government. So the government can redistribute, usually just redistribute to themselves, though. So, like the example I gave you, if the father didn't make a will and suddenly died, the government can say he never wrote and had it documented that he was going to give it to his son or daughter, so now the government, we will just take it. And in charities, if you give your money to charities, I think it was the Chinese actor John Dong-hoon a number of years ago gave millions of his dollars to charity and wanted them to give it to the groups of his choice. Okay, so this is all forms of redistribution. Next, 5, market exchange, which originally meant only a specialized place to meet. And barter, barter is, how much will you pay for this? $5. No, I'll take 3. That's bartering. Or buy and sell. Many village level societies held markets, but usually on an occasional basis. Polanyi, again the author, opined, or his opinion was that modern capitalist societies had progressed from having markets to being market economies. There's quite a difference there. So in other words, like let's say Santa Monica's weekend farmers market, that's having a market, but it doesn't set the economy market in Santa Monica, right? The other things do, the McDonald's, the Third Street Promenade, the Foods for Less, they're the ones that set the Santa Monica economy. And in which markets dominate the entire economy and even non-economical social relations. A market is a relatively impersonal institution, right? Again, we talked about earlier the invisible hand. There's not a face we see that, oh, that's the market, that's the kind grandfather. Like it's an invisible person or thing. And this is founded on the commodification or the establishment of a money price for everything. So again, let me give you a personal experience here to kind of clear things up here. I can remember a time when they were first gonna come out with the 99-cent store. Okay. Most of you were not even born, so hang with me. So when the general public first saw these, first of all, the economy was, well, keep it to LA, the economy was fantastic in Los Angeles. Just fantastic, right? Plenty of jobs, plenty of hours, good pay, rent was cheap, food was cheaper, everything was fine, you know, unbelievable. Movie tickets were under $5 an hour, $5, believe it. Okay. So anyway, so I remember when people first saw these places, they were going to open and they were stocking them. People said, what the hell do we need a 99-cent store for? It doesn't make any sense. The prices are so cheap at the Bonds and the Ralphs. That's another thing. We had a lot more other stores too. The Bonds and the Ralphs are kind of like Bank of America that took over a lot of different banks that we had, building into a corporation. I mean, we had stores like Hughes and Dale's and Smith's Food King. All right. So people just said, what are we making these? Who's going to go in here? It's embarrassing. You don't want your friends to see you to go into a 99-cent store and buy something for 99 cents. But fast forward to now, 99-cent stores are everywhere and they're always full of people. Why? Because the economy has shifted. Groceries are expensive. Food at restaurants are expensive. Rent is too expensive. We have a homeless population. We have a lot more legal and illegal immigrants than before. So how are you going to survive? You have to go to the 99-cent store. Now it makes sense that you go there. I have a friend, he's from the US, and he says, I don't feel embarrassed. I go to the 99-cent store and I buy my vegetables and stuff and save a lot of money, you know. And as his rent of his studio apartment keeps on going up, I understand what he's saying. So again, you have to look at these things for, as we say here again, markets are not asocial, though as society still proclaim a certain market morality. They're not too morality based now, forbidding, for example, price gouging and price fixing and the commodification of sex, body parts, or babies. This is a different line here at the bottom, but again, maybe what's going on now with the pandemic again, we could say that there is price gouging at the supermarket where things should not sell for so high. Oh, and let me tell you something else. I don't know if you guys know. Again, this is consumer information. Again, I'll tell you what happened to me. Okay. I won't name the place. I'm not for attacking places, but it's a restaurant I like to go. It's West LA, and they have branches in different cities, right? So I went there, and you usually just know, like I looked at the menu and I know how much my burger and fry combination is, and I know what my buddy's having. He's having the fried chicken or whatever, and then you can kind of guess the tax, since we pay the highest sales tax in California, and you're like, okay, I kind of know what it is. And then you look at your bill and it's even more than you expect. And I was like, how's this possible? So I looked at the bottom and there was this weird extra charge of like $3. And I talked to the waiter and I said, what is this? So I don't know if you remember, but a couple years back, they voted to make the managers of the restaurants pay their waiters and waitresses more money, that they weren't making enough money. Okay, so that's an issue between the managers and their workers. So now they were secretly, and I was lucky that the waitress told me this because she wasn't supposed to. They try to take it out of you that hope that you don't notice. You just go, I guess the tax is pretty high. Then you got to read the real small print that it says, you're also paying, it's like you're paying the manager because he has to pay his employees a little more money. And I don't know if that's stealing or not, but obviously it's price gouging. So look for that anytime you go to a restaurant now. It's supposed to be on the receipt. Just don't take it for granted that it's a high California tax. Okay. A word to the wise. Next, the third phase, consumption, is the least theorized, but has not gone unnoticed. So people know about it, think about it, even though they haven't theorized that much about it. At least as far back as 1899, Thorstein Veblen realized that consumption was not a simple matter of fulfilling physical needs, but was also a social act. People chose to consume certain things rather than others because of the symbolic social meaning of those things, and people also imitate the consumption patterns of others, especially more prestigious or famous people, members of society. Now, we don't, I'm going to say this, well, everybody knows that, especially with Beverly Hills close by, um, everybody wants to mimic the Kim Kardashians, and you know, you name it, they change over time. We get newer ones and what have you. So you gotta have your Gucci shoes, your Prada bag, your Cartier watch, all these kinds of things, so that people can look at you. A typical big city thinking like LA, New York, what have you, right? So, but there's other things too. Like I'll never forget when I was first teaching in K-Town many years ago, and I had a student, and he was new to the U.S. Now, again, on your F1 visa, not supposed to be working, right? You're here strictly to be a student. Okay. So anyway, I saw this young guy, and he was driving around in a BMW. And I thought to myself, as his parents are rich, they gave him a lot of money to buy a BMW. Such a young guy. I mean, I could see, I mean, I had a car that was, at the same time, I had a car that was 10 years old at the time. And that's enough for me. I just get around in it. So, anyway, I thought, and this guy has to pay the rent. It was cheaper then. It was, wasn't low. It was much better than San Francisco. And the groceries were cheaper and what have you. So I'm like, how, you know, but it's still LA, the big city. I don't even know if he has a job. It's not smart to try to get involved in a big car payment like a BMW, and then you could lose it. And then what are you going to do, right? Your importance are your rent and what have you, food. And then I found out from somebody that he said to a lot of young Korean guys at the time, and he was Korean, he was telling me, he told me I didn't understand the situation because I was thinking economically. He said, no, the prestige, the respect that he would get driving around K-Town with a BMW as a young guy, and of course, attract beautiful young Korean women, was the most important thing to him. And I didn't realize that he was actually sleeping in his car. Uh, he would go to his friend's house to take a shower, and they would feed him, different friends, and all his money, because he wasn't paying rent, was into maintaining so that when people saw him, Korean people saw him in K-Town, they thought he was well off. Okay, so just like American, you know, people in LA, that the guy wants to have Gucci shoes because he wants to be like Brad Pitt, and the woman has to have a Prada bag, and you know, it affects other people too that get here. They're easily affected. So, I don't know. Another personal tidbit there, explaining this consumption pattern, right? They want to imitate the rich and famous. Although no one, to my knowledge, has proposed a typology of consumption, anthropologists have been investigating the cultural contours of consumption since Galric Mallory's 1888 essay, Manners and Meals. Boas included, remember that author from the last couple of lessons? Included a detailed discussion of salmon recipes in 1921. Okay, here's again what I talked about in the beginning. You don't have to remember any of this, because what did I call that stuff about Einstein and going to the bakery and buying an apricot Danish and going to his friend Yo-Yo. This is fluff. Okay, this is fluff. You don't have to remember about this 1888 essay. You don't have to know about how Boas detailed it in the salmon recipes of Quatquilto. Not important. Okay, so don't worry about that jazz. Okay. That's some fluff that escaped me, but I had to get this is what's important. I had to explain it. Okay. But just a little fluff, like when you order a steak and it doesn't have a lot of fat, but it just has a little and you can put up with it. Right? Okay, continuing on the top. In their review article on the anthropology of food, Sidney Mintz and Christine Dubois identified a number of research areas, beginning with the studies of specific objects and commodities. Mintz himself wrote a well-known study of the cultural history of sugar in 1985 titled Sweetness and Power, The Place of Sugar in Modern History, and in 2011, Daniel Miller and Sophie Woodward edited a volume on blue jeans across culture called Global Denim. That might be good because that talks about how people, like I mentioned a long time ago, there you used to not be able to get blue jeans in, let's say, Europe or Asia, as they were stolen and then sold on what is called the black market. That is not the case now. And there was a high demand in Europe, especially Eastern Europe and different countries of Asia. I knew a guy from Thailand 25 years, 30 years ago that's what he did. He had his own black market for blue jeans. So things are different now. Next, Mintz and Dubois mentioned in the relationship between consumption and social change, raising the issues of modernization, industrialization, and urbanization. Globally, shortages, rising prices, foreign production introduced a threat of commodity insecurity. That is, the potential of not being able to afford goods or of having the supply shut off. And we've had this panic at the beginning of the pandemic, where your local Ralphs and Bonds were out of toilet paper, for example, if you remember. It was toilet paper, milk, meats that you go in there and the shelves were empty. So this can happen here too, and it has happened. Fourth, consumption is clearly tied to ritual. All societies consume specific things on specific ritual occasions, like cake for American birthdays, pine trees for Christmas, or matzo for Passover. That's for Jewish folks. This cake and American birthdays, that's just, it's not a, these ones are good. Pine trees for Christmas. That means a lot of trees for a specific day, Christmas. American birthdays can happen any day. Matzo for Passover. So I would submit here turkeys for Thanksgiving. So we might be looking this year at a turkey shortage for Thanksgiving. Millions of turkeys for one specific day. Okay? All right. There are also ritual occasions for feasting or fasting, as in the month-long daylight fast of Ramadan for Muslims. People must learn to consume. So Mintz and Dubois included the matter of instructional materials in their list of consumption topics. This includes cookbooks as well as fashion guides. Again, good information, a little fluff here. This includes cookbooks as well as fashion guides, housekeeping tips, usually aimed at women, and consumer evaluations, like the magazine Consumer Reports, all manner of online reports. That's a good magazine to get into. Just like I gave you my consumer advice about looking at your receipt at the local restaurants in and around Los Angeles or Pasadena or whatever, and look for that extra employee fee or charge. So Consumer Reports will tell you all the places where you could save money, right, that people don't think of, okay? Like, and I used to read it. So like, for example, if I go back to the 99-cent store, You can get what do they call the container? Wow. Well, they used to be cans, but now they're in plastic. So let's just say a can. You can get a can of motor oil that if you went to the automotive store, Track Auto, for example, might cost you $4.50. And that same 20, 50 weight will cost you 99 cents at the 99-cent store. You might need three of those. So imagine three for 99 cents, $3. Three is less than one can at 450 of the oil. So you make a nice savings there. Okay. So Consumer Reports is good for things like that. Okay, finally, Mintz and Dubois stress the significance of consumption for social identities, reminding us that consumption serves both to solidify group membership and to set groups apart. Culture defines what is consumable in the first place. Pork is abhorrent or disgusting in Judaism and Islam. They do not eat pork for their various reasons. So they're not going to be upset if there's a bacon shortage. Okay, not at all. Or they're not going to go to McDonald's for McRib. Okay. And dog does not count as food for mainstream Americans, but maybe some people will eat dog. I remember years ago I had Korean students and they'd say, oh, well, all Korean people eat dog. It's not true. And then I found out that it was getting harder and harder. I guess they were passing some laws in Korea that even in Korea, the country where everybody's supposed to eat dog, it was getting almost impossible to get dog. So maybe in China it's still easier, I'm not sure. So strong dietary rules also associated with particular cultural or religious communities, like kosher for Jews and halal for Muslims. So in the issue like kosher and halal, the animals have to be killed in certain religious ways. That, for example, the kosher, it has to be with the Torah, and halal has to be Islamic, right? And they feel it's a much more humane and clean way. The regular, just American way, they do not accept. Right? Consumption is obviously also differentiated by gender, class, age, and region. National dish or cuisine is often crucial to the identity and unity of a country or ethnic group. What was the old one here? Hot dogs and apple pie. Now we have so many ethnic groups now. I don't even hear about hot dogs and apple pie. I hear about red velvet cake and I don't know, but more than hot dogs, pizza maybe. Yeah. Some indigenous peoples are attempting to recover or preserve their food traditions. For instance, native tech, indigenous food and traditional recipes. So that's about people, let's say, are Native Americans and they're Apache, Cherokee, Mohican, whatever. And they're trying to make a market and try to make more of their own natural foods that maybe they only got when their grandmother was cooking for them. And now grandmother has passed. And like, we're missing our food here. We got to do something about this. Right? I remember when it was hard to find salsa in LA. Now there's so many brands that you don't even have to go to the American store. You go to a Mexican store and get more authentic salsa. And the same with, I don't remember kimchi being in the stores, but now you can even get kimchi in an American store. You don't have to go to uh, the Koreatown, stores, H Mart or what have you. And individuals can proclaim and display their identities through their choices of food, clothing, cars, home furnishings, and such. I can tell you when I was a kid, people always say, buy American. And I have an American car. I eat American food and all this kind of stuff. I don't see that much anymore, but I still see people that come from other countries here, like let's say, Koreans. that will tell you I have a Korean car, and 99.9% of the time I gotta have my Korean food, like American food too much. So these things happen within different societies. One of the more unexpected changes in recent years has been the voluntary adoption of traditional coverings by Muslim women. The burqa or the hijab or the niqab, the variety of Muslim women's coverings is quite extensive. Seems like the oppression and anachronism to many Westerners. Women frequently choose to wear it, the mark of religiosity, of modern modesty, or anti-modernity and anti-Western culture. Yet sellers like Artizara, Inaya, and Islamic Design House, with the slogan, "A beautiful faith, a vibrant city," strongly illustrate that Islamic women can be faithful, fashionable at the same time. So all they're saying there is that, you know, Western thinking was, well, you have to cover up your face and you don't have any freedom and what have you. And a lot of women who are becoming, and that's American women too, becoming Muslims are like, well, I wear it because I'm against Western culture, or I wear it because I still think I'm beautiful, or it gives me power to cover up my face. That's the feeling, okay? The corporation in the global economy. One of the dominant social forms in modern world is the corporation. No analysis of contemporary economics would be complete without it. In her pivotal 1979 essay, The Anthropology of the Multinational Corporation, June Nash brought the anthropological perspective to bear on the internal organization, the external effects of the corporation. Yet, despite the ubiquity of corporations and their influence on our lives and power, Marina Welker, Damani Partridge, and Rebecca Harden chastised or scolded the discipline as late as 2011 for overlooking it, finding that corporations rate little attention in the indexes of introductory anthropology textbooks. I don't care about that too much. They don't keep them in such high respectful regard. And the upper level undergraduate and graduate seminars on corporations remain rare. This is especially odd given that corporations shape human experience not only in spectacular and disastrous ways, but also in mundane, which means boring, everyday, ambivalent, not choosing a side, and positive ways. They are, after all, the source or conduit for much of what we wittingly and unwittingly produce and consume. Millions of people worldwide labor for corporations and depend on them for income. On a less obvious and visible register, corporations participate in the material making of our bodies, from our molecular makeup to our posture, which is indelibly shaped by our posture that is logged behind a computer or stooped over a short-handled hoe, working out hard in the field. Neglect of corporations as social actors is even odder because they are not new institutions. That meaning that a new institution might not know what to do socially, but the corporation has been around for a long time and should. Corporations were absolutely central to the European colonialism and later expansion of American power. The British East India Company, founded in 1600, is that far enough back for you folks? Wow, 422 years. This functioned like a virtual government in Asia for decades, maintaining its own treaties, forts, and armies. And the Hudson Bay Company, which I always remember hearing about the Hudson Bay catalog, served the same purpose in Canada, even printing its own paper money for 50 years. Other countries such as France and Holland had their colonial corporations, and American corporations have projected American power since the late 1800s. Remarkably, but understandably, many indigenous societies have met the challenge of the modern world by forming or becoming corporations. This is like the Native Americans here owning their own casinos. The number of Native corporations in the world today providing services for themselves and for outsiders is staggering, unbelievable. A few examples are the Hawaiian Native Corporation, the Bumula Aboriginal Corporation, the Julu Warlow Group Aboriginal Corporation, the Maori Megamall, and many Alaskan Native regional corporations. The Bafokeng of South Africa are not only an indigenous kingdom, but also a registered company. Royal Bafokeng Holdings, which manages the society's mining interests and other investments. Other indigenous peoples' mining interests and other investments. Other indigenous peoples have used their wealth to purchase major businesses. The Seminole, which is an Indian tribe in Florida of the southeastern United States, are the current owners of the Hard Rock Cafe chain. Did not know that. I thought that was someone like Donald Trump. Because of their unique political status, many Native American societies have been able to open lucrative, see, that's what I said, gambling establishments, aka casinos. Cultural anthropologists have long worked on corporations as well as working for corporations. Xerox famously hired anthropologists. Okay, and that's the end. They hired them. So on to the questions. Okay, 1. When most people think of economics or the economy, what comes to mind? That's in the very first part of the reading. That should be easy peasy to find. Okay. 2, explain the economy, not economy, as one of the 4 basic social domains of cultural anthropology. So there's 4 basic social domains. Just talk about the economy. Okay. 3, economists conventionally divide economic activities into which 3 phases? So there's 3. That's exactly what I want, not 2 or 4 or 1. Demogen, Pilcho, Alex. 4, according to Karl Marx, a mode of production gives rise to what? Again, look, I use the key terms in the answer, so you should be able to find it. I don't try to modify them and confuse you. Next, what is one of the main principles of the anthropological perspective on economics? Principle 1, okay? 6, anthropologists realize that production has to what? What does it have to do, right, to be successful? 7, describe the post-industrial phase in the U.S., specifically the U.S. What are the 2 acts of consumption as described by Veblen? So look what Veblen said about consumption, and there's 2 points there. So it has. 9, what is one of the dominant social forms in the modern world? It's an easy one towards the end of our reading. 10, what is the goal of anthropology of the corporation? Okay. Anthropology of the corporation. Okay, don't be confused. Okay, now we're at the end. Now we'll go back. Now we'll stop share. I'm back. Hello. So have a good week. And again, this is set for Monday, August the 22nd. Okay, so I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.